In this episode, we're going to take a deep dive into the three-way match in accounts payable. This is the foundation of the accounts payable function. Stick around until the end when we discuss what goes wrong when the match doesn't work. Hey guys, I'm Mary Schaefer, founder of AP Now, back to discuss another issue that is near and dear to the hearts of those who work in, manage, or have responsibility for the accounts payable function. Alrighty. So let's get started. What is the three-way match? This is the process every accounts payable department should use to ensure that invoices that they are paying are accurate, legitimate, and have not been already paid. As you know, duplicate payment of invoices can be a problem, and it's an even bigger problem now because we have so many suppliers who are sending duplicate copies of invoices. But I digress. Back to the three-way match. Okay, the three-way match involves three documents: the purchase order, the receiving document, and the invoice. Let's discuss each of them in a little bit of detail so you can understand what they are and what their role is in this much vaunted, much talked about three-way match. Okay, so the three documents. The first document that starts the whole transaction, if you will, is the purchase order. You'll sometimes see it abbreviated as PO or PO number because they all have numbers. And basically, this is the document that your purchasing department will prepare and send over to the supplier placing the order, okay, the purchase order. Okay, and it will delineate, what they want to order, should have price on it. Many times they'll have terms and conditions, and it sets forth, if you will, the terms for the transaction, or at least the terms for the transaction as far as your organization is concerned. If the supplier doesn't agree with anything on it, like let's say the price, they should go back and forth with the purchasing department and the purchase order should be changed to reflect it. So if your guy says the price is $1 and the vendor says no, the price is $2, the price on the purchase order should be changed to whatever they agree the price is. Okay, that's purchase order. Receiving document, sometimes also called packing slip. You've all seen them when you've ordered things online and the stuff comes and there's a little piece of paper in the inside telling you what's in the box that you ordered. I'm sure you've all noticed, well, like if you've ordered from Amazon, that little tiny piece of paper. Well, in the business world, it should be a bigger piece of paper. When the goods come in, what the folks on your receiving dock should do, I'm not saying they necessarily do it, but they should make sure that what is on the packing slip or the receiving document is what they receive. So if it says 15 widgets, there should be 15 widgets in there. If they are broken or there's any other problem with it, it should be noted. And of course, then there's the good old invoice. The invoice is basically the bill that the vendor sends asking for payment, and it should match what was on the purchase order and match what was on the receiving document. So, simple example, if there were 100 widgets ordered and supplier only had 75, the receiving document should show 75. But let's just assume for our first example that everything matches. So when the invoice shows up in accounts payable, the accounts payable department then looks in the system for the purchasing order that goes along with it, and hopefully the invoice had the purchase order number on it, so that will make that a little bit easier, and the receiving document. They should match all three of them, and when they all three match, they set it up for payment. Now, in most organizations, before the three-way match is done, that invoice is sent to purchasing for approval, or to whoever who placed the order for approval. You would think that that person would do the checking and make sure that it matched what was on the purchase order, but that rarely happens, or it doesn't happen that often, and that's why the accounts payable department does the three-way match. Okay, so you've got your three documents, you've got your approval, and hopefully if everything matches, you can then set it up for payment and the vendor can be paid and everybody will be happy. But what happens when those three documents don't agree? Okay, before we discuss what happens when they don't match, I'd like to invite you to subscribe. It's free, completely private, and you can unsubscribe at any time. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hit the bell next to the subscribe button and you'll be notified when we post new content, which we do on Tuesdays and Thursdays for accounts payable related issues. And on Saturdays, we're now posting Wordle videos. So if you happen to be a Wordle lover, we invite you to check out our Wordle videos. Okay, back to the matter at hand. What happens when they don't match? This is what I refer to, not everybody does, but I refer to as having a discrepant invoice. It means there's a discrepancy. It means somebody has to figure out what happened, contact the purchaser, contact purchasing, figure out what's the correct amount, and then pay it or have the documents altered. Now, what happens in the real world is that typically resolving discrepant invoices falls on the head, if you will, of the accounts payable processor. Personally, I think this is a little unfair. Everybody involved in the transaction, they're the ones with the least knowledge. They don't, understand always what was ordered, any nuances, but they're the ones who are typically tasked with resolving these discrepancies. So it will often mean phone calls or emails to determine what should be paid. Now, some people take the opinion they just pay the lower of what's on the invoice or the purchase order, but I don't really recommend that. Yeah, it gets your company the lowest price, but there's going to be a discrepancy then, especially if the price was lower on the purchase order and you pay less than the vendor billed you for. So I really do recommend getting the discrepancies resolved rather than, taking this hardline approach. Okay, ideally, and I'm underlining ideally with, 14 lines, you'll get these discrepancies resolved before the payment due date. And this way the vendor will have no excuse, if you will, for sending a second copy of that invoice. So anyway, it falls on usually the accounts payable processor to get the matter resolved. Now, a lot of the automated solutions will have a discrepancy resolution module built in. So when there's a discrepancy through the module, the accounts payable person can send a message to either the vendor or somebody in purchasing to get this resolved. In theory, this should work really well, but like everything else that, in theory works really well, in reality, it doesn't always work that well. I've had several people on the vendor side, on the supplier side, complain to me that, when the accounts payable person doesn't want to deal with it anymore, they just mark it closed. Likewise, I've heard accounts payable folks say that the vendor community does the same thing. So, it goes both ways. But anyway, the discrepancies should be resolved and ideally before the due date. Invoice practices are critical, by the way, to the success of any accounts payable department. You probably realize that. That's why we created a series focused on changing invoice best practices. There's a link to it, by the way, in the show notes, and on YouTube, a link will appear momentarily. As always, I greatly appreciate those thumbs up, those shares, and of course, those comments